Last night our session got together for a time of fellowship, and you all have been participating with us the last few weeks. We've been asking for sermon topics coming up for our next sermon series. The next sermon series is entitled, You Asked For It, and we have a little promo for it right now. We had 30 some odd suggestions, and I'm going to tell you, you all asked some of the toughest questions that I've ever seen, and we're going to be dealing with them beginning next week. Next week, we've got the prodigal God. Is the same God in the Old Testament and the New Testament? Which one do we come home to? And it's going to be a great conversation beginning next week. But today, we get to take what I call a little time out and come back down to earth and engage with something that's real. Something that we don't think about a lot. Something that goes on right in front of us and we don't recognize. And that is the trafficking of young people, especially. And today I'm so thankful for Derek Thomas, who I've known for many years, who God has, I believe, ordained and called into ministry to advocate for children, especially young girls and boys who are taken advantage of. And I would like to read just a passage out of, as usually, I'm hawking books all the time, right? I do that. There are several books outside. I'm going to read just a couple of excerpts. One is from Just Courage, God's Great Expedition for the Restless Christian. And the other is entitled The Locust Effect, Why the End of Poverty Requires the End of Violence. And there are a couple of other books here, but I'd like to just wake you up a little bit this morning. It was my first massacre site. Today the skulls are all neatly stacked on shelves. But when I first encountered them, they weren't. They were attached to bodies in a massive mess of rotting corpses in a small brick church in Rwanda. As the director of the tiny UN Special Investigations Unit in Rwanda, immediately following the genocide in '94, I was given a list of 100 mass graves and massacre sites across an impoverished, mountainous country where nearly 1 million people had been slaughtered, mostly by machetes and farm implements, in a span of 10 weeks. When I stepped off the transport plane to join the small international team of criminal investigators and prosecutors that were assembling in the Rwandan capital, the country carried an eerie, post-apocalyptic emptiness. I didn't even realize until I was loading into a van outside the airport that I'd entered Rwanda without passing through customs and immigration, because there was none. The usual and powerfully subconscious markers of order and civilization and security had been utterly swept away in an engulfing orgy of genocidal war, and it didn't feel good. Well, we ended up starting in Ntarama, a small town north of Kilgali, in a small church compound where all the bodies remained just as their killers had left them, strewn wall to wall in a knee-high mass of corpses, rotting clothes, and the desperate personal effects of very poor people hoping to survive a siege, but they did not. Spanish forensics experts were working with me in picking through the remains and lifting out each skull for a simple accounting. Woman, machete. Woman, machete. Child, machete. Woman, machete. Child, machete. Child, blunt force trauma. Man, machete. Woman, machete. And on it went for hours and days. Our task was to assemble from survivor testimony and this horrible mess of physical evidence a very precise picture of what really happened. Friends, this is a reality that's occurring in our world right now. And I think a question for us today is, what is God's heart for those victims? And what's God's will for the church in responding to this major issue? And today, I'd like to welcome Derek Thomas. Derek, if you'd come up with us, please give him a big hand. Derek, for a while, Derek, he stole my best youth leader away from me, Alicia, his wife, Thompson, now, and they have 4 beautiful daughters, Amelia, Avery, Isla, and Eleanor.
Good job. I can't even remember them.
That's good. That's good. So Derek, tell us a little bit about how you got where you're at right now and what you're doing as far as ministry goes with More to Life.
Yeah, how I got started on this topic, human trafficking and trafficking of women and children, actually goes back to this book. So I'm hawking another book here. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
I got room for one more.
Don't cross my turf again. Okay, go ahead.
10 years ago, I was at Fuller Theological Seminary, and it was my second quarter. I was working with the person helping me figure out what my class schedule was going to be like, and she said, why don't you take this elective called Children at Risk? I think it's something you might be interested in, and I thought, sure, why not? I'll give it a shot. So signed up for the class, and the first book we had to read for the class was called Children in Crisis. And you can see it's a very thin book. These are only books I know how to read. They have to be very thin. 64 pages long, and it was giving 5 different ways that children are in crisis in our world today. It was just an overview type book. So kind of go through these 5 different topics. And chapter 5 in this book is the one that really changed the direction of my life. In fact, it was even just the title. I stopped at the title. And it was called Children Caught in the Sex Trade. And I couldn't believe what I was reading at the time, 10 years ago. In fact, I thought it was kind of like a sick joke that there is no such thing as a sex trade, and certainly children aren't caught in it. And so it just didn't seem real to me at the time. But as I went through the class and started learning more, God really started to do a lot in my heart and mind. And ultimately, it has led me to where I am today.
Very good. Now, you talked about it's kind of an event that catalyzed for you your mission and kind of what trajectory you're on right now professionally. What was that event?
Yeah, because the short story is that after seminary, I started in the youth ministry, and I was back in the youth ministry. I was a youth pastor in Sarasota, Florida at Church of the Palms for 6 years. And what led me from youth ministry now into full-time work with a trafficking organization called More to Life is an experience I had 3 summers ago on a mission trip. We were in Denver, Colorado. I had a team of 12 people on this mission trip. And on Wednesday of the week that we were there, we were with a partnering organization who was leading us that week. And on the Wednesday of that week, the organization said to my team that the only way we were going to eat dinner that night is if we have to go beg for food on the street. And they called it a homeless simulation. And the reason why they did that in Denver is because there's a large population of youth who actually live on the street, who are homeless. In fact, we had seen some of them as we were out doing our work. We had noticed that there are youth living on the street. And so the organization wanted to give our youth an idea of what that would be like. And so within 20 minutes of our team being on the street, I was following 2 of our high school girls. One was 16, one was 15. And they had a sign that said, fell on hard times, please help. And as they were out there on the street, within 20 minutes, a car pulled over and solicited my girls for sex. And that was a quite shocking experience. And I said, okay, girls, let's get off the street. we'll go have some pizza back at the church and talk about what just happened. My team was actually split into two different groups. I was getting my team back to the car, and I was about to call my other adult volunteer, seeing the other team, but she actually beat me to it. She called me. And when I answered the phone, she said, "Derek, you're never going to believe what just happened." And I said, "Well, I have a story for you too, but go ahead, you go first." And she said, "Our 17-year-old football player, a male football player, was also solicited for sex within 20 minutes of them being on the street." And I said to Tammy, "You have no idea, that just happened to us as well. Get back to the church." The pizza, I ordered the pizza. So that was a very alarming experience for us. I had already known about the issue. I'd been learning about it, but to see it firsthand and to see how vulnerable youth are when they get on the street and how quickly it can happen. What really hit me in that moment 3 summers ago is, why we're the only people who are actively looking for vulnerable youth, people who are wanting to exploit them in some way. There was churches all along those streets, and I was thinking, isn't it amazing that vulnerable youth could be right in our midst, right on our corner, and who is looking for them? Who is out there actively seeking them? And for me, God was saying, are you going to let a buyer or a trafficker or a pimp be the first one who gets to that child, or will you go actively look for them as well?
Okay, you've mentioned a few terms, like get some definitions from you. Trafficker, how would you define that?
Yeah, and I want to say, after the service today, the 11 o'clock service, we have a lunch being served, and I will be going through Human Trafficking 101. So if you'd like to learn more, we obviously can't cover everything right now, but if you'd like to learn more, I'll be going over a lot more today during lunch. But trafficking, what was the question? How do you? Because this could take a long time.
Just if you could
definition
briefly
yes.
define what trafficking is.
So I'll go with the federal definition of trafficking. There's 3 different types of trafficking. There's labor, and because there's kids in here, SEX trafficking, and we'll just call that trafficking.
They can't spell.
They're good.
So
okay.
it's good. Yeah.
All right. No one knows what that is. Okay. And domestic servitude. And so when it comes to trafficking, the federal definition is a commercial sex act induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or in which the person induced to perform the act has not attained 18 years of age. And so what that simply is saying is that people who are involved in prostitution, pornography, or stripping are where our sex trafficking victims are found. They are found in one of those 3 industries, if you will. If they are there because of force, fraud, or coercion, then they are trafficking victims. However, if they are there and they're under the age of 18, you do not have to prove force, fraud, or coercion. A minor that is involved in pornography, prostitution, or stripping is a victim of human trafficking. And those who are profiting off of it or soliciting it are actually criminals.
So you're saying you use the word pimp.
Yeah.
Never hear that word from up here again. But it says, and could you just, because there are TV, there are TV shows out there, like Pimp My Ride and all this stuff. What do you mean by, what is that term?
So, in trafficking, there are obviously those who are, there are those who are looking to exploit other people for profit. And that's really what a pimp is. A pimp is someone who's willing to exploit other people to make a profit. And culturally, it is interesting to see how the term pimp has kind of lived in our culture and some of the transformations it's had most recently in pop culture and social media and things like that. The word pimp has actually been meant to improve things. It's been kind of like a positive term, like if you want to improve your car or you have an awesome house, man, that's a pimp. So it's a very positive thing, but when you look at actually who pimps are and what they do, they are modern day slave owners. And they are there to exploit and take advantage of vulnerable people.
Yeah. If you could describe a little bit of what's going on in Florida right now, and specifically, you could cite the Florida states that you talked about, but okay, I'm throwing too many questions at you at one time. But I'd really like you to talk about the process through which young girls are identified and can we say coerced or taken into the trade.
Yeah, the profile of the victim is important for us to understand, especially again because we're talking about prostitution. That's the one I think that general public gets the most held up on, because the old way of viewing prostituted women is that they're adult women who are there